What would happen if a Buddhist monk falls in love and lets his sexual desires control him? Hi guys, welcome to Explained. Today we'll be watching a 2003 South Korean movie called Spring, Summer, Fall, Winter, and Spring. So, let's get started. Turn on the subtitles and spoilers ahead. A Buddhist monastery is situated in the middle of a beautiful lake, and there lives a monk and his disciple. The only way to access it is through a boat, and even though there are no walls, the lake is only accessed by two big doors. The season is spring, and we see the doors to the lake opening. We see a small monastery where an old monk is praying in front of a Buddha statue. He completes his prayer and wakes up his disciple from sleep. The young disciple wakes up and directly goes to the praying area. He completes his prayer and goes outside. There the monk and the disciple get in a boat and leave. The monk goes to look for food in the village, whereas the disciple collects herbs from the forest. While collecting herbs, the disciple reaches a big Buddha statue and sits to look at the scenery. No matter how far he looks, he only sees the monastery in between the lake. The two of them meet at the big door and get in the boat. They reach the monastery where the monk helps the disciple distinguish between edible and poisonous herbs. Here the disciple has a dog with him as a pet, and he plays with him all day before going to sleep. The next day we see the disciple playing in a forest, where he catches a fish and ties a stone around it. Then he releases it in the water and laughs as the fish is unable to swim. The old monk is watching him from a distance but decides not to interfere. The disciple then catches a frog and ties it to another stone. He again gleefully laughs and enjoys as the frog struggles to move. He does the same to a snake, and the monk watches it all from a distance. The monk decides to go back and take a big stone with him. He reaches the monastery and finds the disciple sleeping. He ties the big rock around the disciple's back and waits for him to wake up. When the disciple wakes up, he struggles to move properly with the huge rock tied behind his back. The disciple requests the monk to free him, but the monk refuses, saying that he tormented the fish, the frog, and the snake in the same manner, and he needs to experience the pain which is inflicted upon those harmless and defenseless creatures. He orders the disciple to find and free all the three creatures. The disciple obeys his master and leaves in the boat with the stone still tied to his back. After searching for a while in the pond, the disciple finds that the fish is already dead, as it couldn't live with being tied to a rock. He cries and buries the fish. He then goes looking for the frog, and luckily the frog is still alive. The disciple unties the rock and lets the frog free. Unfortunately, the snake didn't make it and is dead, causing the young disciple to cry uncontrollably. Then the scene ends and we see that summer has arrived. The door to the lake opened once again, and we see that the disciple has become an adult. He goes to the master to collect some herbs, and there he sees two snakes mating. He feels a tingling urge in his body, but he ignores it and he moves on. Then he sees two women coming towards the mountain. The two women are actually a mother and her daughter. The daughter is sick, so her mother has come to meet the old monk and hope that her daughter gets treated. The disciple greets the women and takes them to the monastery. In the monastery, the old monk explains to the mother that her daughter's soul is suffering, so once her daughter's soul finds peace, her body will become healthy too. So, the next day the mother leaves her daughter behind so she can find inner peace in the monastery and get healthy. Slowly we see that the disciple is starting to catch feelings for the girl. While the girl is changing her clothes, he accidentally opens the door and sees her without a shirt. He nervously closes the door and leaves. In the afternoon, he gets inside the monastery and sees the girl sleeping. He thinks that it's cold, so as a gesture of goodwill, he decides to cover the girl with a blanket. Just then, he's unable to control himself and starts touching the girl. The girl wakes up in disbelief and slaps him. The disciple realizes his mistake and starts apologizing to the Buddha statue. The old monk arrives a little later and is surprised to see his disciple pray. The scene ends there, and we see that the disciple now has a chicken as a pet. Time passes by, and one day the disciple takes the girl out in the boat. He's so fascinated by her body that he keeps staring at her and even follows her in the forest. The girl is trying to catch a fish, so the disciple catches one and gives it to her. He again gets excited by her body and starts touching her face. He slowly moves his hand around her body, but the girl pushes him away and leaves. As the monastery is very small, they all sleep in the same room. At night, the disciple and the girl can't help but look at each other. The next day, the monk and his disciple can be seen preparing a drink for the girl. The disciple gives the drink to the girl and she drinks it. The treatment is working and she's starting to feel better now. One day, the disciple is on his boat and is rowing it in around. It looks like he's greatly frustrated by the sexual tension between him and the girl who's eagerly watching him. He can no longer control his temptation and jumps out of the boat. He pulls the girl into the lake and they both get on the boat. He then takes her to the jungle where they finally sleep with each other. After spending some time together, they both get dressed and head back to the monastery. At midnight, while the old monk is asleep, the girl invites the disciple to sleep with her. The disciple breaks the rule and goes straight to her. They start spending more and more time together, and the monk is completely unaware of it. One night, the girl wakes up and gets out of bed. The disciple gets the signal and gets up from his bed. Then they both get inside the boat and spend the night there. When the sun rises, the old monk wakes up and finds his disciple sleeping naked with the girl. He pulls the boat towards him and plugs out the boat's drain hole, letting it get sinked. The disciple and the girl wake up to find that the boat is flooded. Aware of his actions, the disciple starts apologizing to his master, but the monk doesn't show any anger or disappointment. He merely warns his disciple that lust leads to desire for possession, and possession often leads to misery. Then he asks the girl if she has recovered, to which the girl replied she has. The old monk says that she should leave now as she has no business here. After that, he himself goes to drop her off while the distraught disciple cries in sorrow. The monk takes the girl to the entrance door of the lake and closes the door on her. While the monk is sleeping, the disciple is still in distress over not being together with the girl. He packs up the Buddha statue in a bag and decides to leave the monastery. He plans to meet the girl in the outside world, leaving his monk life behind. The master is actually awake, but he decides to not stop his disciple from doing what he wants. The disciple leaves with his chicken in the boat. He releases the chicken in the forest and goes to find the girl. Time passes by and then autumn season arrives. The old monk is still alone and has a cat as his pet. One day he comes back from the village with some food. The food is wrapped in a newspaper, and when he's eating his food, an article in the newspaper catches his attention. The article was about a man who has fled after killing his wife who was cheating on him. The man in the newspaper is none other than the monk's disciple, and the monk gets sad reading it. Next, the monk starts preparing clothes for his disciple as he knows that he will be returning anytime soon. The monk's prediction actually came true. The desire to possess made the disciple commit a murder. Then we can see the disciple returning to the monastery. He has grown significantly and can be seen as really angry and frustrated. The monk goes to pick him up in the boat. Then they come back to the monastery and the monk asks him about his life. He shouts that his only sin was to love, and he killed his own wife as she cheated on him. The disciple had truly changed a lot and is really frustrated because of how his life ended up. He puts the Buddha statue back where it was when he took it. He takes the boat to the jungle and lets out his frustration in privacy. But the old monk is seeing all of it from afar. The next day he attempts to commit suicide in front of the Buddha statue by holding his breath. But ending his life in such fashion isn't possible, and as a result he starts coughing. The monk overhears him coughing and opens the gate to check on him. He gets angry seeing his disciple attempting suicide and beats him with a stick. He further punishes him by tying a rope and hanging him. When the disciple is suffering, the old monk writes some mantras on the floor with his cat's tail. The disciple finishes the punishment and cuts his hair with the same knife he used to kill his wife. He comes outside and sees a mantra written all across the monastery's floor. The old man orders him to carve each letter of the mantra with a knife and says that his anger will slowly fade with each letter carved. The disciple follows his orders and starts the work, but soon the pond's gate opens and we see the two men calling for the old monk. The two men are actually police officers who are there to arrest the disciple. The monk goes to pick them up and brings them to the monastery. The police officers want to arrest the disciple, but the old monk asks them to let him finish the work. Respecting the old monk and the Buddhist culture, the policemen agree to wait until the next day. The disciple continues cutting the mantra and doesn't even stop when his hand starts bleeding. He spends the whole night carving through the mantra and sleeps only after finishing the work. The following morning, the old monk wakes up and starts filling the carvings out with colors. Even the policemen help the monk in filling the colors. Then the disciple wakes up, and as the old monk has said, his anger and frustration are completely gone now. He feels blissful and calm. Now the disciple bows in front of his master and leaves with the two policemen. The three of them get in the boat to leave, but it doesn't move. It only moves when the old monk waves his hand and says goodbye. Now that the monk's disciple is gone again, and for a long time, he gets sad and starts planning something. He places some wooden logs in the boat and leaves his minimal belongings in the monastery. Then he lights the wood on fire and sits on it to the end of his life. This is actually a Buddhist ritual to end life on will when you have achieved your purpose in life. While the wood is burning, we see the old monk is actually crying. This indicates that even he was unable to escape the pleasures of life. Then the monk's body is engulfed by the flames, and we see a snake passing near the boat. This is to signal that a new life cycle of the monk has started, and a soul never dies. Years pass and the gates to the lake open once again. The season is winter, and we see that the disciple is returned after finishing his sentence. He goes to the monastery and finds a snake sitting on his master's clothes. A snake represents a rebirth in Buddhism. In an attempt to honor his master, he collects his master's ashes and places them inside a Buddha statue. The following day, he wakes up and creates a hole in the frozen lake. He uses the lake's water to wash his face and then goes to check his master's books. He resumes his training using the methods mentioned in the books, and days pass by. One day, a woman with her face hidden and a crying baby in her hand shows up at the monastery. The disciple welcomes her, and she prays in front of the Buddha statue with tears in her eyes. At midnight, she leaves the baby in the monastery and decides to run away, but while leaving, she accidentally steps on the hole that the disciple had created. She falls in the water and dies in the freezing water. In the morning, the disciple wakes up and retrieves the woman's body. He blames himself for leaving the hole open, and following his master's principles, he decided to punish himself. He ties a heavy stone around his waist and takes a Buddha statue with him. He starts his journey toward the mountain, and as he climbs, dragging the stone wheel behind him, he's struggling to carry the statue. He reflects upon the fish, the frog, and the snake he tormented. After hours of climbing, he reaches the mountain's top and places the statues there. He meditates there for a while and takes a look at the beautiful view, and this time, instead of just seeing the monastery, he's able to see much farther away, which indicates that his vision and life have grown exponentially. In the end, we see the doors to the lake open once again in the spring season. Now the disciple has become the master, and the baby that the woman left is his disciple. This time they have a turtle as their pet, and the disciple plays with it too. The young disciple is exactly how his master was. He can too be seen torturing a fish, frog, and snake just like his master did. This indicates that a human's fate is decided, and he will always suffer before finding the right path. The movie has numerous scenes that have a deep meaning. In the beginning of the movie, they have a fish as their pet, which represented freedom. Then they had a dog, which represented the disciple's obedience toward his master. When the disciple becomes young, he had a rooster that represented his desire to chase pleasures. Then a cat represented the need to adopt pinpoint focus for achieving self-realization, and a turtle that represented longevity and calmness. Lastly, the monastery represented a body. The lake's water represented a spiritual mind, and the boat represented a medium that helps us connect with the outside world. The door to the monastery represents a gateway of good or bad vibes that enter into our life, but how we keep ourselves on the right path in every situation is the real test. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and comment down your thoughts on the video. And before you leave, please make sure to subscribe to the channel for more movie recaps.